Hello and welcome to the SEAI's 180 Degrees podcast. I'm your host, Sinead Ryan, and over the course of the next 12 episodes, I'll be joined by special guests to talk about the state of play of Ireland's energy revolution, how we can be smarter energy users, what renewable technologies are coming into our homes and communities, and how small businesses can benefit from decarbonising now. Welcome to episode 7 of the 180 Degrees podcast. I'm Sinead Ryan, your host. And on this particular episode, we are going to look at the topic of district heating. Now, is it a reality for the country to have a decarbonised renewable heat source for our buildings and urban communities? There's plans on the way to develop more district heating projects. And what is it? How does it work, and why are we behind in using it compared to the rest of Europe? Well, joining me on this episode is Margie McCarthy of the SEAI. You're very welcome back, Margie, to the studio. And alongside Margie is Peter Kehoe, who specialises in decarbonised heat at the SEAI. Welcome along to you both. Now, I have to start with, I think, the most basic question of all. I've never heard of district heating. What is it?
Well, it's a great question, because I do think that's part of our job actually across the nation with such a ambition for district heating, is to try and explain it to people as to what it is. So in its simplest terms, it's where heat is generated in a central location, which is known as the energy hub. And then that heat is directed out to homes and buildings in a local area through insulated pipes across a heat network. And so essentially what it is you're getting heat to your home rather than a fuel where you generate the heat in your home. So most people will have an oil or gas boiler, for example, where they get the fuel in and then it's generated on site.
Okay, so there's a centralised source, and then so that means that homeowners themselves don't have maybe fireplaces and oil boilers, or does it work through existing heat pumps?
So the important thing for district heating is that you have a wet system. So most people will have central heating systems where water goes from their boiler, whether it's gas or oil or a back boiler or something like that. And it heats water, and then that travels through their pipes into their rads and into their water cylinder. So it's important that people have that. If they have that, then it's a very simple technology. Essentially, the connection between you and the way the heat is travelling through the heat network, so the insulated pipes outside your front door, is through a little machine called the heat interface unit, and that's about the equivalent size of your boiler. So it's quite simple. I suppose low maintenance. You've no longer got a big boiler to clean out all the rest. That's all sitting now in an energy hub. And there's also better air quality in the area, because our ambition is to have renewables feeding into the energy hub rather than fossil fuels. And so that's really important in the energy hub, actually, is for Ireland that we ensure that we have a really good mix in there of the way in which we're generating the heat, but that we're relying heavily on either capturing waste heat or renewables.
So that begs the question, Peter, why aren't we doing it?
Well, I suppose it is when we compare ourselves to our European counterparts, it's much more established on the continent. And I think, it comes back to probably policy decisions back 50 years ago, where a lot of it originates. Back to the oil crisis in the 1970s, countries had to reflect and look at how their energy system operates. So they had to look at it from two pillars, and one was reduce their energy demand and look at their natural resources. And in Ireland, we found, we found gas, and we increased our consumption of peat for electricity generation. But the finding of the gas resulted in us developing a national grid supplying heat to a lot of our homes, and still to this day. But when we look at our European counterparts, a lot of them developed district heating, and that was because they didn't have those natural resources, but also the district heating allowed them to incorporate a lot of the resources they did have. So they had the incinerators, waste heat from incinerators, or from wind generation, or from coal plants. So I think a lot of it comes back from that time. And look, there were very appropriate policy decisions at that time, but
you work with what you have.
You work with what you have, but things have moved on in the last 50 years, and we know there's a third pillar now, and that's decarbonisation. And that's where district heating has really demonstrated itself to be flexible and technology agnostic.
So when you talk about decarbonisation, just explain to listeners what that means. It's getting away from fossil fuels and using other types of energy, which we've explored in previous episodes, like our wind energy and solar energy. Is that ultimately what's required for district heating to be economically and carbon successful?
Yeah, well, district heating, as Margie was saying, allows us to incorporate low carbon technologies at scale. So we can see now that we can utilise renewable energy sources and waste heat sources effectively going forward, but at a scale different to our individual domestic units. And it's something that district heating has been shown over the last 40 years at being very suitable for upgrading over time. So I was very fortunate to visit Denmark last summer, and we were able to visit an energy hub that was feeding a city, and we could see the transition of heat generation over the decades. So provisionally it was a coal generation plant, and then in the 90s it transitioned to a bio-CHP, and they're actually constructing now heat pumps, which are going to be the future generation for the district heating scheme. So district heating scheme doesn't really care where the heat source comes from. It's technology agnostic, so it's future-proof. And what it's demonstrated is those countries that have district heating rolled out at scale are very capable to transition to those low carbon technologies that we're talking about.
Okay, but talk to me a little bit about the infrastructure. Margaret, we're used to the size of a domestic heat pump. It's about the size of a washing machine or a little bit bigger, and you put it in the back garden or wherever. Everybody can understand that size. What's required, say, in a town or a city for district heating to be successful? Because it sounds to me like it would only work best in a very urban setting because you have to all connect all the properties to it. What size is the structure and where typically is it placed?
So before I get to the infrastructure piece, actually, on the question of urban versus kind of more rural areas, if we take a step back for a minute, we conducted in SEAI a heat study, so a national heat study in 2022, and that's a really comprehensive study that looks at how we use our heat, where we use it and what we use to fuel it. And then we modelled out various different solutions to see how could we get to, as Peter just talked about, decarbonising our heat use, which unfortunately currently is 94% met through burning fossil fuels. And what that found is for our heat in our buildings and water heat, so that's across homes and businesses, the best solutions were heat pumps and district heating. And the real, I suppose, revelation of the heat study was district heating was found to be viable. So it was a cost-effective and useful solution for areas that were probably a little bit less densely populated than was originally assumed. So it's not saying that it's suitable for rural areas, but certainly it meant that more of the towns and larger towns and cities across Ireland were now suitable for district heating. And so then going to the kind of infrastructural question. In the beginning stages, you really need to set up the main spine of the district heating network. So if you think about a tree with the main trunk and the branches coming out, or your body, the main spine and the various different limbs coming out. So you design the system on the basis of the energy hub. So is there waste heat in an area? And then you look at your bigger energy users. So things like hospitals and universities, swimming pools, those kind of heat use, constant customers, I suppose, for the network. And that's how you decide, okay, that's the main spine of the network. Have you got energy, whether it's renewables or waste heat, to feed those anchor loads, and then it'll grow out to kind of residential areas. And what we did on the heat study is we did heat mapping across the country, which helped us to identify where we might have waste heat and also where are the heavier loads. And people can actually go online to SEI.ie and they can interrogate their own townland and see whether it's a potential there or not. Of course, that's a starting point that we'll get to later. But the big thing around infrastructure is it is a very simple piece of technology. It's an insulated pipe with hot water going through it. So there's nothing very complicated around it.
Okay, so there's no kind of massive building that is going to be needed to run this? Is it put in a field and then run through? Or how does that practically, what's it going to look like?
So that's the important thing is people in homes and businesses along a road that this pipework will be laid in may not become customers of it in the immediate terms. In the longer term or the medium term, they will. And so it does involve big digs. The energy hub will be a location of its own, obviously. It's a building where you'll have...
And people are used to that with generators and big pylons and all that kind of stuff.
But if you think of the utilities that we have in place between electricity, between our telecoms, between water, all of those required networks.
Plant.
And literally digging up roads. And that's the thing that we really need people to support is, yes, I agree with the big dig because it's going to deliver a really efficient, cost-effective way that's friendly to the environment for me to heat my building.
So short-term pain for long-term gain.
Absolutely.
A bit like the Bus Connects project we were talking about in previous episodes. Peter, we're not coming into this blind. There is a district heating project in Dublin, actually, in Tallaght. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, we do have district heating schemes in Ireland, but we've recently constructed one in South Dublin County Council in Tallaght. It's a very interesting project. It's a demonstration project that shows us what district heating can do in Ireland. So it actually takes waste heat from a local data centre and puts it through a heat pump which boosts the temperatures up to a level that's suitable for use in buildings, and they're taking that heat and transporting it to the local area, so it's feeding the university and South Dublin County Council offices. So it's a really good example of what district heating can look like in our locality. And a novel piece of it as well is, you're talking about the energy hub and what it looks like. When you pass by it, you wouldn't realise what it is. It's just it's a nice looking structural building. And a novel thing about it is it doesn't have a flue. So generally for an energy centre of that scale, you'd have a pipe going to the sky, but they're actually completely fossil fuel free. It's electricity based with waste heat from a data centre.
So no smoke and no pollution and nothing to see here.
Yes, exactly. And slowly as our electricity grid decarbonises, that'll become more efficient and decarbon free.
And how sustainable is it? Now, I'm not talking about in terms of eco-sustainability. I'm talking about, can it go down? Can it black out? Is it constant or are there periods of time where maybe it doesn't work as efficiently?
No, it generally works always as efficiently. There are backstops, in case of there is downtime for a piece of plant, there will be a backup supply. And in the case of the Tallaght district heating scheme, it's an electric boiler. So it is still pulling down from the electricity grid, which, as we know, going into the future with wind generation, it will be, still carbon free.
Margie, where does this fit into now, the Climate Action Plan? Has the government committed to looking extensively at district heating as one of the pillars of our future technology?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, it's responded very quickly, I think, on the back of the National Heat Study. I suppose was the largest body of evidence that we had to support it, although we had viability studies done as well in Dublin in particular. Immediately after the heat study, the government set up a steering group to look at, what are the key things we'd have to consider in the country if we want to scale up and accelerate district heating at the rate that the heat study was pointing to. And their recommendations were published last August, in August 2023. And at the same time, the Climate Action Plan identified a target for district heating for 2030. It's terawatt hours, so I won't go into that.
Don't give us the maths.
Let's
give us the unscientific numbers.
Exactly. Now, what it's equivalent to is about 10% of our residential heat demand.
Okay.
Now, that's an equivalence, so I would caution people because, as I said earlier, we will have to address the larger heat anchor loads in public buildings, etc. first. So it won't necessarily be 10% of houses.
Yeah, but if all the dots line up, there is an equivalence there that you could say a chunk of our heating could be provided in this way. Peter, how does that fit in with European averages?
If you look at our European countries, somewhere like in Denmark, there's 60% of their heat is delivered from district heating. Now they are at the top end of the table, but we can see a lot of other countries have significant shares. But what's more interesting is the countries who are similar to Ireland with low shares have big ambition over the next 10 years to develop district heating. So we are very much in the lower end of the scale when it comes to district heating rollout at the minute.
So 10% would then seem quite achievable once everything else is in place. For what time scale are we looking at here? Do we know?
That initial target is to 2030.
Okay.
And that really is the starting point. District heating is a long-term project for Ireland. We really want heat networks playing their part in heating our buildings for as long as we can think into the future. But so that is really about initially scaling up. In the same time, between now and 2030, there's commitments to building awareness and planning across other towns and cities that have a viable district heat map currently, and moving them along the kind of project cycle to see, are they fully feasible as projects, and get shovels into the ground to try and build these things and lay the pipework. That's the biggest challenge we'd have to get over.
Well, certainly the whole topic of district heating certainly has a champion in Minister Eamon Ryan, because he's been writing and speaking about this extensively. And I suppose there's a piece of education then to be done with ordinary people about what this might mean for them. And you mentioned, Margie, that people can go on and have a look at this heat map, which sounds to me, it runs a little bit like, an underground, where you can go and see the route where everything works. What type of urban areas are most suitable for this? I mean, give us some examples of where this might be initially targeted.
So the way district heating viability is measured is a thing that's called linear heat density. And what that means is that you've got a kind of a critical mass of heat demand within a kind of a boundaried area, right? So that you don't have long lengths of pipeline where you've got a house and maybe another few kilometres down the road, another house. Like, it's not going to be efficient to serve heat to those areas that way.
So we've seen that actually. Probably the closest analogy is rolling out broadband. Because, that works fantastically well in urban settings where you can have a centralised mast. But we hear that there's lots and lots of places still in rural Ireland, pockets that just cannot get broadband. For that reason, it's not economically efficient. It doesn't make any sense privately for it to be done, or even for the state to do it. So is it a fair comparison?
So I suppose it's a fair comparison, and I think that's what really came out in the heat study, is that there was a marriage of solutions for heat and water, for heating space and water, and they are district heating in areas where that's viable, and then heat pumps in areas where it's not. And both will have to play their part. There will be areas and pockets in Ireland that isn't. We've got large rural communities, and they'll be better served by other solutions like heat pumps than district heating. But we do know that there are larger towns where district heating will be viable, and it's just such an efficient way when you think about it as an end user, whether you're a homeowner or a business owner. It really is a small heat interface unit. The difficulty will be maybe outside your door there'll be pipework laid, and that's always disruptive for people. But it's such a way in which we can have, as Peter was saying, an agnostic energy hub that allows us to keep an eye on pricing, for example, around different efficient and renewable technologies. And you're pumping in heat from the one that's the most cost effective, for example. And you spoke about the government's steps that they've taken. One of the biggest things that came out of the steering group recommendations to the government were 10 principles that district heating scale up in Ireland should follow. And they were things around making sure that cost is, its consumers are considered in all of this. They're protected in the same way as other utilities.
Yeah, because you need buy-in. And at the end of the day, if this is going to be so disruptive, more expensive, difficult to get their heads around, you're not going to, no politician, that's not, is going to go along with it, because that's not an easy sell for people. So let's talk about then some of the challenges that would be faced by individual towns or communities if this is, and when it sounds like this is rolled out. So the building stuff first. What is actually required to get this in an urban area, Peter?
Yeah, I suppose you kind of have to bring it back to that project life cycle that Margie was talking about. So we have that map that we talked about previously, about where it shows the areas where it can go. But that's very much a model approach and a national outlook. You kind of need to delve into the local area in itself. And
well, talk to me about Tallaght then. How did that work?
I suppose the next stage would have been master planning. So they would have looked at where their energy users were, and we call them anchor loads. And they're the large energy users like the universities and the hospitals and the local authority buildings. And that would have mapped out their network And that network, spinal piece, the heat network, would have been in the public road. So they would have noticed that the road would have been dug up to lay a pipe to facilitate this heat
aren't we used
network.
to that? That's not, they wouldn't know what that was. We're used to seeing that all over the place.
We're a country that's quite good at laying pipe at this stage.
We're a country that's quite good at digging up roads as well.
Yeah, so
right.
but that is what is required for district heating to be rolled out at scale. And that's what it'll look like in the first phase. It's like the energy hub, I don't think is a huge inconvenience. Like it'll be a local.
It'll be on a brownfield site somewhere.
It'll be on a brownfield site, and you might not even know it's going to be an energy centre. You know, so it's more laying the pipe. But again, like you said previously, it's short-term pain for the long-term goal, and the long-term goal is, a low-carbon technology, delivering heat to your property.
So I can fully understand then a hospital or university or a local authority office getting on board with that, as kind of guinea pigs, but also because they can immediately see the benefit for such a huge energy user. You know, you'd imagine facility managers would be coming, all over this, wanting this to happen. But when it comes to the end rollout, if you're going to bring it domestically to people's homes, that sounds to me like a different kettle of fish altogether, because, whatever about digging up the main street, how does it enter my house? And maybe that's what people will be worried about in the longer term. So how did other countries do that successfully? Yeah,
it's similar and different, I suppose. It's still like Mary was saying, phase one is, the short to medium term will be feeding those anchor loads. And then in time, the heat network will expand similar to the roots of a tree. And I think, you'll be taking street by street. So you'll be looking from buy-in from customers who want your product. They'll want, rather than maybe installing a heat pump and retrofitting their home, they see district heating as a viable alternative that's available to them on their street.
And I suppose when it comes then to new builds, if you have an apartment block going up as part of a planning or development, it would sound to me like that's stuff that's much easier to do from the ground up rather than retrofitting.
So 100%.
Isn't that the way to go? And you're in an apartment block maybe of, 200 units. District heating, that would make you a big user then all of a sudden, wouldn't it?
It would, and if you're building from brand new, you will build it with knowing that you're going to connect to the district heating network that will hopefully be running outside your road. Is
it cheaper for consumers? Because if it's going to cost the same as natural gas and oil and fossil fuels, they'll want an added incentive, Margie.
I think that's the benefit, as we said, of the energy hub is ideally once established, there's a mix of sources of generation playing into the energy hub. And that means that you can look at, what is the pricing structure around electricity versus maybe you've got really high renewable intake or waste heat that's available to you. And you play that out as the operator of the scheme to ensure it's as cost efficient as possible in the pricing structure for customers. So
okay, and so people who get to use this will be playing their part in that. It sounds to me it might be neater and tidier, certainly if it's, there's no pollution involved in it. Is that the kind of the USP of it? Look, you're not even going to know it's there, it's underground, it's hidden. It's a bit like the fibre optic cables. You're not going to see these big pylons overhead or chimneys.
No, it is. And I think, when you talk to people across Europe who are on a district heating network, a lot of the time they don't realise they are. They just know they get a heat bill and they pay it and they get high comfort, instant heat, instant hot water. So there is high levels of comfort with the district heating network. And look, there's a heat meter there that you get billed similar to any other utility. And you don't see the water pipe coming in, you don't see your gas pipe or your electricity generally coming into a home. District heating would look very similar.
Great. Okay. Well, that sounds like something that we can all get on board with. So my next key question is then, what's it going to all cost?
So the recommendations were made in August 23. As Peter was saying, we have mapping now. The conversations and feasibility studies need to happen at local level. We have estimates, certainly in the heat study, as to what the overall cost would be to deliver. Remember, the potential for this is up to 50% of our building space and water heating needs. So we have estimates within the heat study, but now they need to be really sense checked against the reality on the ground. As Peter said, it's a model. So that's going to take a bit of time, and certainly what the recommendations and the government's actions with they have a heat building task force is really looking at that. What's the economic case now around particular district heating areas? And the other part of it will be to grow the conversation and awareness. If you think about it, for local authorities, this is a real advantage for them in meeting climate action plan targets, and it's something that they can offer for development in their area. From a developer, like you just said, a multi-unit like apartments and everything, it is a simpler, cost-effective, renewable way that meets the building regulations. So it kind of ticks a lot of boxes. The important thing really in the immediate term is being able to point to where it's viable or not, because you want people to know, even if it's not immediate, that it's coming down the tracks, or they need to consider an alternative solution. So that's important.
Is government doing enough then at the moment, or is this going to be local authority led? I mean, your heat map is there. We know where it could take place. We know the model. We know the ideal. So presumably we know, look, this area of the country here would be ideal for this. Mm-hmm. Do local authorities know that? Are they beginning to feed it into their planning processes? Or is this something that has to come down from central government with a budget attached to it?
So there's a mixed approach that's really being decided at the moment, but in the recommendations there's the opportunity for both public and private led to try and accelerate deployment of district heating as quickly as possible. So if conversations need to happen at local authorities, they're very much aware they have to plan around their renewable energy strategies. For example, district heating can play its part there, as well as an efficiency methods that they have to adopt. But private developers are also talking to local authorities. Really, I suppose our immediate ambition in the country is to get this up and running at scale. As we talked about, we've got one really successful project. We've another one possibly around Dublin that it's showing like it should be viable and will go ahead. But we need more of those projects. So we need as many hands on deck as possible, and in the meantime, in parallel, figuring out things like regulation and protecting customers, and what's the long-term ownership model, for example, for district heating networks. All of that is in play at the moment.
So, Peter, then finally, what does good look like? Is it that nobody notices, apart from the road being dug up and resurfaced?
Yeah, I think so. I think what good looks like is we've a number of district heating schemes that are being constructed over the next few years. Like, that's what the ambition is, and especially if we want to meet that target in 2030. So there's a lot of good work ongoing at the minute, but really when we say about what are the challenge is we need to get pipe in the ground, and we need to do that at scale, and that's what good is going to look like, and that's what's going to help us get to our end goal. I think it's also important, just there are a number of benefits outside of district heating than just the end consumer as well. So like I said originally, like the pillars that we're looking at, like it does provide us with energy security. Like we can use a lot of sources that we have here in Ireland today, and it helps us, especially what we've seen in the last couple of years, like with prices, that we can use our local energy sources to supply these district heating schemes. It also allows us to couple our electricity sector with our heat sector, which is really good for Ireland, particularly when we have a variable electricity generation.
And there's been a big gap there up to now in that, because they are separate and completely differently fuelled areas, really, aren't they?
Exactly. And we're going to have curtailment of electricity, and we can use our district heating networks to store energy, and it's probably the cheapest form of energy storage we have, or we see across Europe. So we could really utilise that to maximise what we do here in Ireland in terms of a wind energy, which we're very good at. So these are some of the benefits, and obviously, as Mary was saying, it's like to meet our targets. So the local authorities, the public sector, and the homeowners, like looking forward to 2050, district heating allows us to get there at speed, rather than trying to do individual properties one by one. We're coming with a local solution that will help get us there faster, and that's like a key benefit of what good looks like.
It sounds like a very exciting project. I have to say, I've learned a lot about it, and it was something I didn't know a lot about before. Margie, where can people find out more if they want to?
Well, they can go to seai.ie on our website, and the heat maps is it's a really good place to start. And look, there's lots of information on district heating in Codema, as well as a company that are an organisation that's been helping across Dublin. But really, a starting point is at our website to have a look at your local area and to start talking about it and
find out
get
if it's a hot spot for
Exactly.
district heating. All right. Well, listen, thanks to both Margie McCarthy and Peter Kehoe on a really very informative conversation, I must say, breaking down district heating, how it works, what it is, and how we can go further with it. Tune in next week for a mini episode, a roundup of what it is, how it works, and how it might affect you. And thank you very much for tuning in to this week's episode. If you've enjoyed this episode of the 180 Degrees podcast, well then why not review and subscribe to it now? And of course share it with family and friends to find out more about renewables and energy. Well then check out seai.ie.